Good morning from Washington. On this Wednesday, the morning after a night of movement and momentum shifts in the Democrats' campaign for the White House. The story remains very dynamic as we join you this hour, but there is one clear change. It's all about Biden versus Sanders. No one else is even close. But I'm close to two fantastic guests. This is the hour I've really been almost looking forward to most. We have been getting your questions all morning today and yesterday and for the next foreseeable future until we run out of questions. We have answers for you. Our senior Washington editor, Lindsay Duncombe, Keith Bogue, longtime member of the CBC News team, most recently here in Washington, longtime friend of our program. We've had the primary primer and so many conversations over the years. I'm just delighted to have you both and to answer questions from you. So welcome to you on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We're here to take your questions, so you just post them to the comment section. We're going to answer as many as possible in the next half hour. So ready, go. Okay, I'm watching and I'm going to keep track of questions coming in. We've already had some. Yeah. I'm kind of feeling a little badly because Dory Howard wants to know who are the delegates they refer to. And I'm thinking we're a little bit late in the game to be explaining the delegates. But why don't you start?
You know that moment at the convention, if you've watched it, when all of the people sort of coalesce from the great state of Mississippi or wherever it is, those are the people that state sends to the convention. They're the folks that are responsible for taking the results of this vote and putting them forward to actually reach those numbers and choose the nominee.
Okay, and eventually we'll go to Electoral College when it comes to the general election. It'll be the same kind of a thing. So they vote and each state is assigned a certain number of delegates. That's a very complicated calculation. I don't think we want to get into that. But based on that, the overall numbers come in. And what we can tell you is it is 1,991 that the candidate needs to hit a majority to win the nomination outright. Anything less than that means the possibility of a contested convention, and that's another question that we'll get into for sure. But Dave Saunders wondering as well about how this whole business will work and how the delegates work. So Keith, is it winner take all in some states, not in others?
Well, the Democratic primary differs from the Republican in that it's mostly proportional representation. And the impact of that on the race from now on is that if you were a Republican in a winner-take-all state kind of primary, at this stage you could think about coasting because, you win a state, you win all the delegates. There's no coasting in this race. It's still up for grabs, very much up for grabs. There are still delegates that can be shared by shared, I mean split, in every state going into from now until June.
Okay.
So
can I just stop you just for 1 second? We're not hearing. We're having some audio issues. Our apologies. I'm going to stand between you. Okay. So if we pick up everybody's audio there, sorry, Lindsay,
no
little
problem.
dance, then everybody can hear maybe through mine. Hold on. Can I just have that wire? Now I can't hear a thing.
Turn yourself about.
Well, listen, this is a little Keystone Cops. Okay, Here we go. There, I can hear again. All right, and I think we're hearing you as well. So, and we've been talking with Lindsay about this 15% threshold in that a candidate has to get 15% of the popular vote in order to even be considered for the delegate assignment, which for the Democrats is based on a proportional basis, and then off it goes. Okay, I think we're clear on that. Yeah. We have a question from Facebook from Jaban Rabuna. Why do only some states vote? Well, that's just in Super Tuesday. Yeah. They're all going to vote, right, Lindsay?
Eventually, yeah. Yes. And that's really interesting when you see why this Super Tuesday was extra super is because California was added to this early stage in the voting process with all of those more than 400 delegates. So eventually you'll get down to all of the states having their say. However, those that go earlier are responsible for the buildup of delegates and the momentum and how the story goes forward.
And what's really interesting is not just California. I mean, California is the big one, but a number of states, I think it was 9, moved themselves up in the calendar in order to exert a greater influence on the early going.
And because that reflects the greater diversity of the country, right?
Yes.
A lot of criticism about starting with Iowa and New Hampshire, which are largely white in terms of demographics, rural, that not being representative of America at large and the Democratic Party specifically. So by moving states up like California, you're getting a larger sort of sense of how the whole country feels, or pockets of that.
Can you flip your mic around for just a second? I'm going to talk to Keith about this as we look to the future. I want to make sure we hear you very clearly. So if we look to these next states, 1 week from now, Michigan is one of the big ones that votes. 2 weeks from now, then we have Florida coming up. And these are key states to come. These are not as big as Super Tuesday, but they're very significant. But the math for Bernie Sanders in these states doesn't look so good.
Right. I mean, we've already seen him go through this whole process, and albeit in a different order of states, as we've discussed, against Hillary Clinton.
Thank you. Yes.
So there is a record against Hillary Clinton for us to compare to, and it's going to be tough sledding for him. I want to continue to stress it's not over. Joe Biden did not win the nomination last night.
No.
But he just changed the shape of the race dramatically. But yeah, there's a route for Bernard Sanders, but it's not an easy route.
Biden is leading in 7 of the 8 biggest states in the key primaries to come. So it's not math in his favor. On Facebook, Jim Lemaitre wants to ask, although you said it's not finished for Bernie Sanders at all, that the movement is not over, but is it now, Lindsay, a 2-candidate race?
I think for all intents and purposes it is. The question is, does Elizabeth Warren stay in and continue to pick up some delegates, and what that will mean for the total? We have to watch and see what happens with Bloomberg. His campaign has said that they are reassessing after yesterday saying they were in it for the long haul. What does reassessing look like? A lot of pressure on Bloomberg today to make a call and get out. And that also could be a game changer, because remember, Michael Bloomberg has said that this isn't just about him. He's in it to defeat Donald Trump. And what he has said he plans to do is put all of those millions, all those really high-paid staffers on to the fight for the eventual Democratic nominee. The only person who has said that they don't want that cash is Bernie Sanders. So is there a possibility, and could it be soon, where Michael Bloomberg steps out of the race and puts that money and that organization behind Joe Biden, and how would that change the equation going forward?
Okay, we're going to do a little musical chairs when you come back and see us. We're back in our original positions. Come back in the middle. Michael Bloomberg, as we know, his campaign, we understand, huddled today in Florida to assess the way forward. Could there be a pretty cold calculation? He's a data man. You've been mentioning through the morning about whether there is a path for him. It seems to be pretty conclusive that there is not. So the question of Elizabeth Warren also coming, as you mentioned. She's in Michigan. She spent the night there watching the returns. And Julie Jameson would like to know whether it's possible Elizabeth Warren has stayed in the race to pull votes away from Bernie Sanders and indeed from Bloomberg, and wondering if this was perhaps a strategic move to stay in. Why don't we talk about, well, she certainly hammered Michael Bloomberg. We've talked this morning about how she may have really finished his campaign before it seriously got underway by her fierce attacks on that stage ahead of the Nevada vote. But in terms of the progressive lane, Keith, and Elizabeth Warren's strategy, does she stay in to continue to take votes away from Bernie Sanders? Her move next seems to me to be key.
Well, I'm not clear that she takes votes away just from Bernie Sanders, or to flip that around, that if she got out of the race, you could just shift all her votes over to Bernie Sanders. Hers is one of the campaigns, I think, that is going to get scrutinized quite heavily after the election is over. Why didn't she do better than she has? I mean, you remember in the fall, there was a point where she looked like she was going to be the nominee.
Yes.
She was surging. She passed Bernard Sanders, and then she became mired in details about her health care program. Whether that actually was what drove her down or whether it was something else, I think that's an open question and something that people want to explore. But her impact on the race, I mean, I think that it's done, but she's in a difficult position, right? She has been the candidate of the left who was also the Democrat, a member of the party, and the one who identified herself as a capitalist, not a socialist, right?
Right.
So she had distinguished herself from Bernie Sanders. She also has a future in the Democratic Party. We don't know what that would mean, but I would expect that she will play a bigger role than just the senator from Massachusetts if there were a Biden presidency, and if there were a Sanders presidency. So I guess what I'm saying is she's got to think very, very carefully, but also very quickly about what her next move is.
About where her greatest currency is, perhaps, how to
what's the right
thing for her.
Yeah.
You were talking about Bloomberg just a moment ago. Somebody, WCTX, is indicated to us on YouTube, wondering about whether Bloomberg will back Biden if he should go on. if he should drop out, if we should hear something from him in Florida. Seemingly, he said he would back whoever is the nominee with money, maybe not Sanders, as you were just saying.
That's exactly what Bloomberg has said. And, if you look at the reason why Bloomberg got into the race, his calculation was a Biden calculation, looking at how Biden appeared to be floundering in the beginning of the race, wanting to have a campaign that could beat Donald Trump. So now that it looks like the establishment and regular voters are on the moderate side coalescing around the Biden campaign, there would be logic to thinking that the Bloomberg, should he step out, would put his support behind that.
And that will be formidable. I mean, he's promised to fund whoever it is, maybe not Sanders, to the same degree that he would if he were the nominee, which means money on advertising. It means incredible money in terms of organization, paid staffers. It means that social media push that we've talked about for these last couple of days. Those are resources you want to have when you're going up against the current resident in the White House.
And they're resources that, if it were to be Biden, he needs, because his fundraising has not been anywhere close to what Bernie Sanders has managed to achieve. He needs to change that if he's going to go after the huge war chest that the Republican Party and Donald Trump has
They
gathered.
are churning in money. They're bringing in all the time for the Republican side.
He has a ton of money, but don't forget, if he's out of the race and looking at another candidate, he now has to abide by campaign finance rules. So there are different things that he has to consider about how much money he can spend and where to put it. He can't just donate it to.
He can't just have another $500 million.
He could contribute to a super PAC.
Super PAC, yes.
But that can't coordinate with the campaign, or at least that's what the law says.
Right.
Right. Although it's not difficult to figure out what moves the campaign might make. But no, the rules will change for him a bit. His financial contribution will be substantial, and it will be aimed at defeating Donald Trump. But you can't have a campaign where the nominee is directing the funds that are coming from Michael Bloomberg.
Right. Question from Facebook and Donna Light. And Donna, thank you very much for this one. And so far, for all your questions are fantastic. What happens to the delegates for the candidates who leave the race?
Oh, let me see. I just looked this up before we came on the air. They are not pledged to anybody.
They're not, okay.
They are free to do as they choose. However, they supported a candidate for a reason, which is usually that they trust their judgment, at least to a certain extent.
So they will still go to the convention, but they're not attached. They remain as delegates.
But I'm sorry, but just to finish, if you're supporting if you're supporting Pete Buttigieg and you're a delegate going to the convention, the chances are you're going to be supporting Joe Biden over Bernie Sanders, right? So I think that's the way to look at it. But officially, they're not pledged. I'm sorry.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say.
So, for example, Greg was wondering, is it not the number of delegates that determines the Democratic candidate? Yes, it is. Why then does the coverage focus so much on state wins? Why not the cumulative number of delegates earned nationally? Well, we're kind of doing that at the same time. There is this rule, the 15% rule that you've talked about, and that looks at statewide numbers and numbers within the congressional districts, be they House districts, congressional districts, or Senate districts in some rare cases. And everybody has to meet that 15% threshold in those contests and then move on. But then you still do look at the national picture.
Totally. And there are two pools, as you were mentioning, right? There you can get the delegates statewide as well as the district by district numbers. And the other thing that the states give you a sense of is how to sort of characterize the character of the vote. When you talk about Alabama, that's a vote that is largely African American. We saw Biden's black support there. When we talk about California, it's a different story. So there is looking at the states give you a couple different perspectives.
Okay, just want to make sure that you understand. If you hear some noise, we're having all sorts of technical joy, aren't we, this morning? Audio issues, microphone issues. Right behind us, some scaffolding, and they're building something behind us. I'm not sure, but we have some other television studios on the roof just behind us, and they're actively constructing something. So if you hear the hammering, as I understand you are, our apologies for that. We really have no control over it, but thank you all for soldiering on, even though we're in the midst of these distractions. Idly Musing was obviously watching us this morning because we were talking about turnout in Virginia, notably, up over 2016 when it was Clinton Sanders. So the turnout is up. We were talking about how Bernie Sanders has promised to bring in new voters, to increase the base. And yet, even though the voter turnout was up, they were not Bernie supporters. They went for Biden. So Idly Musing, thank you very much, wants to know what that indicates and what it might portend for the general election.
Well, I think if you look at Virginia especially and where that turnout was coming out, it was coming from, suburban areas. And if you add that to what we saw happen in 2018 and the kinds of voters that turned out to bring all of those new members to the House of Representatives and make Nancy Pelosi the Speaker again, then what you're seeing is the people that are most bothered by politics right now, most likely to come out, are in those suburban areas. They're likely more moderate, and their reason for voting is all defeating Donald Trump.
But further to the point that you were making in our last hour, if he can't deliver those new voters, what happens to that? Is there a ceiling to the Bernie Sanders coalition if they're not turning out in the way that he has predicted, Keith?
Sure. I mean, clearly, Bernie Sanders has been saying, I'm the guy who can bring in new voters,
Yes.
and that's what my electability is all about. And he hasn't done it. He hasn't done it to the extent that he was saying that he could. He's kicked the slats out of his strongest argument for being elected because he didn't deliver last night with those younger voters.
So far, I mean, is there still time to prove?
Yeah.
There are many primaries still to
Yeah,
come,
I
as
mean,
you said. It's not over.
Sure. I mean, look at what happened over the last week. What you saw was that Democrats got behind Joe Biden because they got a particular message of how things are going to go. Those who are enthusiastic about Bernie Sanders' candidacy got a message last night, too. They'll react to it. That's what's going to make it interesting.
And they may not be very happy if they perceive that the establishment, Lindsay, has turned against them.
That plays right into one of the things that fuels at least some, if not many, of Bernie Sanders supporters, and that is anger. That is anger at the way the deck is stacked against the middle class and the working class. And this result, the perception that Bernie Sanders pointed out as soon as those endorsements from Klobuchar and Buttigieg came in, was that the establishment was closing in against them. And what that is a sign to those supporters, we are in for a fight. And we know that this is a candidate who will continue to fight to the bitter end, which is exactly what we saw play out at the 2016 convention. And the idea that this could be long and it could be ugly in terms of those two ideological factions, I mean, that certainly exists.
But also, listen, that was African American supporters who started this in South Carolina.
Yes.
Are they suddenly the establishment of the party?
That's true.
That's a
Well,
very dangerous
yeah.
case to start trying to make because they won't feel that way.
You're absolutely right. I think I did read some analysis this morning saying it was not the establishment coming to the rescue of Joe Biden. It was African American voters who have come to the rescue of Joe Biden and would seem very likely to propel him forward. If we have a Biden-Sanders face-off, as it seems to indicate this morning, Faye Marie on Twitter would like to know why age does not seem to play a role in selecting a candidate. You have 78 Bernie Sanders, 77 Joe Biden.
These are not young candidates.
No.
These are not spring chickens competing for the White House here. And I think it is something that people are talking about. Obviously, the younger candidates weren't the first choices of the people. But if we look at things such as vice presidential picks, I mean, generational representation is something they'll have to look at. Also, too, I mean, when you look at men in their mid to late 70s, and there is the possibility that there could be a health concern with any of these
Certainly has been with Bernie Sanders, and he's not released his full health results.
Exactly. They're just statistically speaking, health will, I think, continue to be, and perhaps more so as we go forward, something that will be
Want to
discussed.
add in on that one?
Well,
on
I think the
age
Bernie
point?
Sanders age thing is easier to explain, oddly, because Bernie Sanders is leading a movement. His support. His supporters are devoted to him. They're not even certain, many of them, whether they're going to continue with the process if he's not the nominee. Biden, I mean, there were younger candidates in the race,
Yes.
but Biden's candidacy was perceived earlier on to be so strong
Yes.
that it actually blocked both funding and party establishment endorsements. It kind of clouded the lane that he was in. And so you saw younger candidates who you would think would have terrific opportunities, Kamala Harris for one, Cory Booker, dropping out of the race. They never even got to Iowa.
But what is interesting, too, is that raises what we had at the beginning, or what we saw at the beginning, more than 24 potential candidates, women, men of color, different ages. And in the end, the Democrats may be left with two late 70s men, white. And this is a concern. to many people within the party?
Because diversity is the base of the party, not just African American voters, but obviously the Latino vote, women. Those are all really making up the core of the Democratic Party. That diversity was much touted as being representative of the kind of party they want to have forward. So yes, it is a concern. I think it's a concern on the gender front as well.
They're building a coalition behind us, I think, even as we speak. Multi-generational coalition building going on behind us. Listen, as you raise, I know.
Yeah.
Listen, as you talk about that, though, your point earlier about the key pick of who is on the ticket. If it is one of those men, white, 77, 70, or 8. We've had a couple of questions about that. Bob Leggett from Elginburg near Kingston, Ontario, and also Drew in terms of, well, specifically, should Biden win, who should be his running mate? But Bob Leggett coming with an interesting question. Is there anything in the U.S. Constitution to prevent Biden's choosing Barack Obama to be his vice presidential running mate? Maybe that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It certainly would be unprecedented. Yes?
She doesn't want
She doesn't want not.
Yeah.
But surmise, if you would, Keith, it'd be a different pick, obviously, for Sanders than it would for Biden. But who might they be looking at, maybe in a category, to fill out their ticket?
Well, Joe Biden has to be looking at the African-American vote because they just saved his campaign.
Yeah.
Okay. So does Kamala Harris, Stacey Abrams, are those like
Those are the two
potential
names that I would think everybody would agree would be
All
at
right.
the top of the list. Very
Women
likely.
of color.
Women of color.
I don't see a lot of speculation about who Bernie Sanders should choose if he is the nominee, but clearly he has a balancing issue as well. And one of the things that he has to be concerned about, if he suddenly becomes the leader of the Democratic Party, he's got to stop calling them those people and all that. They are not his people. And he has to do something to demonstrate that. I don't think it would be wise for him to go outside the party and choose a running mate after this election. So he'll look within the party, but he also has to balance in terms of gender, and he also has to be concerned about the fact that in the primaries have shown that he does have a problem with people of color.
So it looks like a woman, a younger woman, and maybe a woman of color in both cases, potentially. They may be looking as they assess things going forward. A great question from Janine Patterson. We talked about this a little bit yesterday on Super Tuesday, and again, our apologies for that. We have no control over the construction going on out of your line of sight, but there's a crew very actively building some scaffolding behind us. Janine Patterson would like to know who these super delegates are and their role in a convention should it be contested. And this is a very important question because the Democrats changed the rule for this primary cycle. So super delegates, number one, you'll explain who they are.
Super delegates are representatives from inside the party, like party insiders, former elected officials, and it used to be that they were able to participate on the first ballot. But remember all of that concern about the power that the super delegates had in the nomination for Hillary Clinton. That has moved back. So now they will not be involved until the second ballot in a contested
The perception would be that they are establishment Democrats
Exactly.
and they want their establishment candidate. If they lessen their power by having them only vote in second round, third round, or whatever it takes, has that gone over well? I mean, do they like? I don't know whether.
First of all, I mean, this happens in Canadian leadership contests as well.
Yes.
You go to leadership convention and you have the elected delegates there, but you also have every member of parliament who's a member of that party.
Right.
You have ex officio members of this, that, the other thing, all kinds of people who have been elected to office in general elections and so on, have a vote in the leadership convention. Same thing here. The problem is that the party has had, for a long time, since 1968 really, a kind of bad reputation for trying to manage the whole thing, and often successfully from behind the scenes. And so it carries with it a stigma, perhaps an unfair stigma, that superdelegates have an impact and could play a decisive role in who winds up being the nominee. But honestly, for a Canadian who's covered a lot of these things, I think we might find that stigma a little bit strange. All of those people who have worked, they probably are among the hardest working people in the Democratic Party. Mostly they've been elected to something at some time. It's not like it's not like they're strangers to the process
Or
or
appointed
illegitimate
or
in
something
some
like
way.
that, yes.
But they have attracted this stigma. Sorry.
And it's going to be harder for Bernie Sanders to criticize the process if we do get to that stage in this contest, because he was part of the rules changes. So
Right.
that back and forth over superdelegates, it's hard to say the rules are rigged against you when you were part of creating the rules.
Certainly, Bernie supporters feel like that was taken away from him,
Yeah.
that it was rigged, that he was robbed as a result of that in 2016. So we'll see if it becomes an issue. Great question from D. Jones on YouTube, and we thank you for them as you continue to watch this on YouTube and on our CBC channel, Facebook, and also on CBC News Network. Had Elizabeth Warren dropped out, like Amy Klobuchar did, like Pete Buttigieg did, what do you think the results would look like today?
It's just a guess.
What's
It's
your
just
guess?
a guess. Well, I think that people who are with Warren, I mean, this sounds blatantly obvious. They're with Warren, they're not with Sanders, right? But I think in this instance, that's meaningful. I think that there's probably less likelihood of them crossing over with Sanders than it might appear to be just by looking at which lane they're in terms of their policies, right? Also, I think just one thing we haven't mentioned is that there are a lot of ballots that were cast in advance of
Yes.
all of the events of last weekend,
Yes.
right? So people were voting for
More than millions of ballots, in fact, more than
people
2
who are
million.
no longer on the ballot.
Yes.
We don't know how those are going to divide up either before we even get to dividing up Elizabeth Warren's.
That's a good point. There was a lot of questioning as to had people voted early before that decisive win for Joe Biden in South Carolina, they might have chosen somebody else based on his weaker early performances, and maybe he wouldn't have been able to capitalize on South Carolina in the same way.
Some of the early votes in California were cast the same day as the Iowa caucuses. So if you were really eager and knew who your person was, you would have missed a lot of different narratives
Yes.
and storylines.
That is true. Just in terms of some technical things as we get close to wrapping up, and again, thank you for these fantastic questions and for all of your amazing insights. But we are wondering whether or not, okay, there's two. Let's do two quickly. Because this is interesting. On Facebook, E. Brackenridge Low, wondering about who gets to vote in the primaries. Are they registered Democrats or are they general population? And that varies state to state. I think I can answer this in that sometimes they're closed and Democrats only, but sometimes they're allowed for Democrats and independents, and sometimes it's open when it can be anybody, correct?
Even a Republican
Yes,
could come in, and
that's right.
there's a lot of speculation about whether that's a spoiler. Like, you pick the person who you think the Republican would have the best chance of beating, but that depends on the state.
Yeah,
But
so
wouldn't it
because
be
you can vote
indicated?
in both, yeah.
You can vote, but couldn't it be interesting though? Because would it not give you an indication of which candidate might have the greater crossover appeal if you're in an open state and you can appeal to independents and to Republicans potentially?
Well,
or no?
You know, look what happened in South Carolina, where the Trump campaign urged its own people, Republicans in South Carolina, to vote for Bernie Sanders, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff
There's a lot going on.
There's a
isn't
lot
there?
going on that people would like to be able to manipulate the system, and I am skeptical about how much of that actually happens. But let me remind you, because I think it's still kind of fun to remember, in 2016 in New York, which
Yes.
is not an open primary, it's closed, and you got to be registered. Trump's kids couldn't vote because they forgot to register
Oh,
because they weren't really.
I
Republicans.
remember
Although
that. We
that's
talked
changed.
about that.
Ivanka Trump is now a
Yeah.
registered Republican, which
We
she
talked
was
about
not.
that at the time. We roared.
Yeah,
That's
she
right.
was not 4 years ago, but she
was
is
not.
now.
So, remaining states, there's a big series of states voting 1 week ago yesterday. So on the 10th, another big group coming up on the 17th. The nominee is declared when he, it looks like, reaches that majority threshold, which is 1,991 delegates, whenever that comes, before the convention or after in a contested convention. That's the magic number. Here's our last question, and it's a goodie from Tom Bazanson. Technically, could Bernie Sanders run as an independent candidate for the presidency if he doesn't get the Democratic nomination? I mean, he's not even a Democrat. He isn't. He is essentially.
He's a Democrat.
He is a Democrat, but he declares
He-
himself as an independent, does he not?
He's already registered as an independent to run for the re-election in the Senate in 2024, right? He is an independent. At some point, it will be too late for him to get on the ballot in the states. But that
So
doesn't seem like.
technically, he could if he doesn't. If he feels like
Technically,
Biden's
he
got it,
could,
he could
but-
say.
Boy, what a skunk at the party that would be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in this election, when people think it's so important to unite
Yes.
and defeat Donald Trump, that would not be the way to do it. Can I just add one thing that I think
Yes,
is
you
really
get the
important?
last word because Lindsay's going to stay with me and talk
Okay.
right up for the next half hour. But this
Next week, 15th, is a debate.
Yes.
It's going to be different because obviously we're seeing what looks like a two-person race.
Right.
There may be Elizabeth Warren on the stage, there may not be. But that's a very good forum for Bernie Sanders. He's an ideologue, which means he understands his arguments inside out. There's not really
They're
an
in
easy
his
way
DNA.
to knock him
This
off
is
that.
just who he
exactly.
is.
There have been big questions raised about Biden's debate performance. Now into this next phase of the campaign, which is very different, with only maybe two of them on the stage, that could be one of the most important events of the campaign.
I think about the Hillary and Donald Trump, well, that's general election time, but once you get into that, you're quite right, one-on-one, everything changes.
Yeah.
You have some radio obligations, so you're not coming back either.
Yeah.
So listen, thank you so much for these 2 days. It's
Yeah.
been just delightful to have you.
So wonderful to have you here in
all
person.
through the
Come back
morning.
anytime.
Well, I would be very happy to. And you, sir, we've loved having you back. You'll be writing online. We can read your analysis pieces online. Do you have anything? When is the next one coming out?
One went up yesterday. I don't know when
The next one is?
gonna-
Well, retirement is agreeing with you, but clearly that brain is still working overtime.
Retirement really agrees with it. Or I agree with it.
Exactly. Thank you for your questions to our incredible guests, and thank you again to both of you. You are watching our coverage post Super Tuesday here on CBC News Network.
Closed captioning is brought to you by the Kidney Foundation. Get the facts about kidney health at kidney.ca.
Do you recall, not long ago, we would walk